Most of us spend our lives searching for a sense of security. We want a stable career, a comfortable home, and a peaceful environment for our families to grow. We are taught that if we follow the rules and work hard, the system will provide a path to a respectable life. But what happens when a person decides that the system itself is the problem? What happens when someone is willing to trade every bit of personal comfort, their health, and even the well-being of their family, for a set of ideas that they believe will change the world? This is the story of a man who was born into the heart of the middle class, but died as a stateless exile in a foreign land. Karl Marx is a name that today carries an immense weight of political and historical baggage. But before he was a symbol, he was a student, a father, and a man struggling to pay his rent. His journey began on May 5, 1818, in the town of Trier, located in the Prussian Rhineland. On the surface, his childhood was the picture of provincial stability. His father, Heinrich, was a successful lawyer who had converted from Judaism to Protestantism to navigate the restrictive laws of the time. He raised Karl on the values of the Enlightenment, teaching him about reason, justice, and the power of the human mind. Marx was a brilliant student, excelling in literature and philosophy. When he moved to the University of Berlin, he stepped into a world of radical intellectual ferment. He joined a group known as the Young Hegelians, who were using philosophy to challenge the very foundations of religion and the Prussian state. It was here that Marx began to see that the world was not just a collection of abstract ideas, but a place defined by power and struggle. He realized that the laws and religious institutions he had been taught to respect were often just tools used to keep the status quo in place. This realization changed the trajectory of his life. Instead of following his father into a comfortable legal career, Marx turned to journalism. He wanted to expose the reality of the world around him. Working in Cologne, he wrote scathing articles about political corruption and the plight of the poor. But the Prussian authorities were not interested in his critiques. They responded with censorship and harassment, eventually forcing Marx to leave his home. In 1843, he began a life of exile that would define his remaining years. He landed in Paris, which at the time was the beating heart of revolutionary thought. It was in the crowded cafes and smoky rooms of Paris that Marx met the man who would become his lifelong collaborator and closest friend, Friedrich Engels. Engels was the son of a wealthy factory owner, but he had seen the brutal reality of the Industrial Revolution in Manchester. Material perspective to Marx's philosophical mind. Together, they began to develop a new way of looking at history. They argued that the story of humanity wasn't driven by great leaders or divine providence, but by the way we produce things and the struggle between those who own the tools and those who do the work. By 1845, Marx was too radical even for France. He was expelled and moved to Brussels, where he and Engels wrote the Communist Manifesto. It was published in 1848, just as a wave of revolutions swept across Europe. The manifesto was a call to action, famously declaring that the workers of the world had nothing to lose but their chains. Marx believed he was witnessing the birth of a new world, but the revolutions were largely suppressed. He found himself once again a man without a country, eventually settling in London in 1849. The London years were the most difficult and the most productive of his life. While he is often remembered as a towering intellectual figure, the reality of his daily life was one of crushing poverty. He lived in a small, cramped apartment in Soho with his wife Jenny and their children. There were days when Marx could not leave the house because his clothes were at the pawn shop. There were times when the family had no money for food or coal. The most heartbreaking part of this period was the loss of several of his children to illnesses that were exacerbated by their poor living conditions. Despite this personal tragedy, Marx spent every day in the reading room of the British Museum. He was obsessed with understanding the inner workings of capitalism. He pored over government reports, economic data, and historical records. He wanted to prove with scientific precision why the system naturally led to inequality and crisis. This work eventually became Das Kapital, a massive critique of political economy that remains one of the most influential books ever written. He argued that the wealth of the few was built on the labor of the many, and that this arrangement was not a natural law, but a historical phase that could be changed. Marx's personal life was a constant battle between his intellectual ambition and his material reality. He was a man of intense contradictions. He was a devoted father who loved Shakespeare and long walks, but he was also a fierce and often harsh critic of anyone who disagreed with his theories. He relied heavily on the financial support of Engels, who worked at his father's firm in Manchester, specifically to keep Marx's work alive. It was a partnership born of a shared conviction that the world needed to be understood so that it could be transformed. Throughout his life, Marx was watched by secret police and marginalized by the academic and political establishment. He remained a stateless person, never fully belonging to any nation. Yet, this displacement gave him a unique vantage point. He could see the global nature of capital and the universal struggle of the working class in a way that others could not. He saw that the problems of his time were not confined to one country, but were part of a larger, systemic reality. When Karl Marx died in London in 1883, he was still a relatively obscure figure, and only a handful of people attended his funeral. He didn't live to see the massive movements that would later be carried out in his name, nor did he see the ways his ideas would be used, and sometimes distorted, by various regimes. He died as he had lived for decades, a man of ideas who had sacrificed everything for his vision of a more just society. His story is a reminder of the human cost of challenging power. It shows us that the ideas that shape our world often come from places of deep personal suffering and relentless labor. Marx's life demonstrates that the pursuit of truth is rarely a comfortable path. It requires a willingness to face exile, poverty, and the loss of status. Whether people agree with his conclusions or not, it is hard to deny the sheer force of his commitment to understanding the mechanics of our world. So, when we look at the structures of our own society today, we might ask ourselves the same questions Marx did. Are the conditions we live in natural and inevitable, or are they the result of human choices and historical forces? And if they are the result of human activity, does that mean we have the power to change them? It is a heavy thought, and one that Marx spent his entire life trying to answer. What do you think about the sacrifice Marx made for his work? Is it possible to separate the man and his personal hardships from the massive political legacy he left behind? It is a complex story with no easy answers, and I am interested to hear your thoughts in the comments below.